Welcome to our deep dive all about Gen Z and activism. We're going to be looking at a recent article called Cultural Revolution, What Gen Z Wants from Activism. It was published just last week on February 23, 2025. So today, we're going to try to figure out what drives this generation's passion to make a change, and also how they're kind of changing how activism happens. Get ready for some pretty surprising stats and stories about real people that might just change how you think about making a difference.
You know, it's really interesting. This article goes beyond just saying that Gen Z is interested in activism. They're not just participating. This is a generation that is leading these movements in ways that we just haven't seen before.
Yeah, they're not just about awareness. They're about action. The article really paints this picture of this generation born between the mid-90s and the early 2000s as these digital natives that are super passionate about social justice. And importantly, they're not afraid to challenge the way things are. In fact, a huge 60% of them actively want to be involved in activism.
Wow, 60%. That is a huge number, especially when you compare it to older generations. We are seeing a big increase in people who want to get involved. And I think that reflects a shift in value. This generation really cares about things like inclusivity and diversity and authenticity. They want to see action. They can spot an empty gesture or someone just saying something without meaning it from a mile away.
Yeah. And that actually leads perfectly into our next point. It's pretty obvious that Gen Z knows how to use social media. But what's really interesting is how they've made it into this powerful tool for activism. It's not just about raising awareness anymore. It's about organizing and getting people to join a movement and even teaching people.
Right. Think about it. Instagram and TikTok have become places where these movements start. Hashtags can start conversations that everyone in the world can join. And a single video that goes viral has the power to make people actually do something. They've taken this platform that was just meant for connecting with people, and they've turned it into this megaphone for making change.
It really makes you wonder, how has social media changed how you think about important issues? Have you ever signed an online petition or given money to a cause or even joined a protest because of something you saw online? Gen Z is showing us how powerful online activism can be, and it's really changing how things work.
Now, while social media is a really big part of it, it's super important to remember that Gen Z's activism isn't just online. This generation is not afraid to actually go out into the streets and say what they want.
Yeah, you're totally right. They understand that real change requires more than just one thing. Remember those huge climate strikes that Greta Thunberg led? That's Gen Z showing up and making their voices heard loud and clear. And it's not just that. They're doing marches for racial equality and working to make their communities better. They're mixing online and offline activism in a really strong way.
And the things they do are so creative. They're using everything from flash mobs to art installations to these interactive campaigns. They're always trying new things to get people's attention and shine a light on the issues that matter to them. That's what makes them so effective.
Yeah, it's so inspiring to see how they're finding all these new and awesome ways to make a difference. Speaking of making a difference, the article goes into the specific causes that Gen Z is really passionate about. And there are a few that stand out.
Yeah. At the top of the list is climate change. And they're totally right to care about that. They see it as this huge threat that could end the world as we know it, a fight for their future. And they want the people in charge to do something about it.
For them, it's not just political. It's a moral thing. And they're not just talking about it. They're taking action. Think about the Sunrise Movement. It's this organization led by young people that's pushing for strong climate policies and green jobs. They're showing the climate activism can be really powerful and make a difference.
Yeah. And then there's the fight for racial justice. This generation really wants to get rid of systemic racism and make a world where everyone is treated fairly. The Black Lives Matter movement, for example, really connected with Gen Z. And they've been leading the charge for police reform and racial equality.
It's incredible to see how much they care about social justice and how well they understand that all these issues are connected. They're not just fighting for themselves. They're fighting for each other. And that's really powerful. But it's not all easy. The article points out that Gen Z activists face some real struggles.
Oh, definitely. Being online all the time and seeing so much information, and so much of it that's not even true, can be really tiring and stressful.
Right. Burnout is a real problem. It's hard to be constantly thinking about these really important but also really heavy issues. The article says that self-care and resilience are super important for Gen Z activists. And I think that's something we can all learn from. Taking breaks and setting boundaries and finding healthy ways to deal with stress are super important for anyone involved in activism.
Yeah. And we have to remember that activism isn't always easy. It takes a lot of courage and dedication and being willing to keep going even when things are tough.
And we can't forget about the challenge of trying to connect with older generations. You often hear older people saying that Gen Z's activism is too sensitive.
Yeah.
Or just for show. But I think we have to remember that every generation goes through its own stuff and has its own way of looking at the world.
Exactly. And even though there might be disagreements
Yeah.
about how to do things, in the end, we all want the same thing, a better future for everyone.
Right. And speaking of a better future, let's talk about how Gen Z's unique way of doing activism is shaping the world we live in. They're not just fighting for change, they're changing the way we fight. And that's what we'll be talking about next.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Gen Z and activism. Before we move on, I think it's important to talk about one of the most interesting things about how Gen Z approaches activism, and that's their focus on intersectionality.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We touched on it a little bit before, but it's worth spending some more time on it for those who might not know. Intersectionality is the idea that, like, different parts of a person's identity, like their race or gender or sexual orientation or like how much money they have, all these things can overlap and create different experiences of oppression and privilege.
Exactly. And it's not just about recognizing those different parts of someone's identity. It's about understanding how they all work together and influence each other. For Gen Z, it's not enough to just fight for one cause. They see that all these issues are connected, and that to really achieve justice, you have to look at everything as a whole.
Right. So can you give us an example of how intersectionality shows up in Gen Z activism?
Of course. Let's take climate change, for example. At first glance, it might seem like it's just about protecting the environment, but when you look closer, you see that climate change doesn't affect everyone equally. Communities of color, low-income communities, and indigenous communities are often hit the hardest by things like pollution and extreme weather, and even being forced to leave their homes because of rising sea levels.
That's such a powerful example.
Yeah.
It shows how climate justice is really tied to racial justice and economic justice.
Exactly. And Gen Z brings this intersectional lens to a lot of the causes they fight for. They see the connections between different types of oppression, and they know that fighting for one group means fighting for all groups.
It's like they're saying, if one of us isn't free, none of us are free.
Yeah.
And that's a really powerful message.
It is, and I think that's one of the reasons why Gen Z is having such a big impact on the world. They're not just fighting for individual rights. They're fighting for change in the whole system.
Yeah. They're setting a higher standard and challenging all of us to think more critically and act in a more meaningful way. So as we start talking about the future of activism, it's clear that Gen Z is shaping that future in some really big ways. What's so exciting is that they're not just continuing the movements of the past, they're creating their own way of doing things. They're combining the best of both worlds.
Yeah, they're taking inspiration from the activism that came before them, but they're also embracing new technology and new ways of doing things, and that's what makes them so effective. They're not afraid to try new things and find new ways to get people involved and make change happen.
Yeah. It's like they're taking the torch and running with it, but they're also building their own spaceships along the way.
I love that analogy. It really captures their spirit and determination.
So, with all that in mind, what does the article say about the future of activism? What kind of world is Gen Z creating?
Well, the article's pretty optimistic. It suggests that Gen Z's values and methods are leading to a more genuine and impactful form of activism, one that's driven by regular people. They're demanding more from organizations and individuals. They want real action, not just empty words.
You're right. Authenticity is so important for this generation. They can spot a fake from a mile away, and they have zero tolerance for it. So if we want to be good allies and advocates, we have to be real in our commitment to the causes we support. It's not about jumping on a trend or doing something just for social media. It's about making sure our actions match our values and showing up in a way that actually matters.
Exactly. It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And, it's not just about being authentic in our own actions. It's also about demanding authenticity from the organizations and leaders we support. Gen Z is holding those in power accountable, and we should too.
Absolutely. They're calling out hypocrisy and demanding transparency.
Yes.
And that's something we can all learn from.
Another important lesson from Gen Z is the power of working together and understanding intersectionality. They get that we're stronger when we unite, and that we need to work together despite our differences to create real change. They're not afraid to build relationships and work with others, even if they don't agree on everything.
It's so inspiring to see how willing they are to embrace different perspective and find common ground. It's a reminder that all our struggles are connected and that we can achieve more when we work together. And I think that's a message that speaks to everyone, no matter how old you are or where you come from.
Yeah, definitely. And while we can definitely learn a lot from Gen Z's energy and new ideas, it's also important to remember the challenges they face, like burnout and all the misinformation out there. We can help them by making sure their voices are heard, by sharing accurate information, and by creating spaces where they feel safe and supported.
That's so important. We have to remember that they're still young and they're carrying a lot on their shoulders. We can all do our part to create a better environment for young activists.
Exactly. And remember, it's not about trying to be just like them or copy their methods exactly. It's about finding our own ways to contribute and make a difference. We all have unique skills and experiences and perspectives that we can bring to the table.
Absolutely. The key is to find our own place in the movement and use our voices and actions to create a more just and equal world. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. Gen Z is showing us that activism can be joyful and creative and even fun. It's not just about protesting or signing petitions. It's about finding ways to express ourselves, connect with others, and make the world a better place.
We've talked about a lot. In our deep dive into Gen Z and activism, we've looked at their values, their amazing skills with technology, the causes they're fighting for, the creative ways they do things, and the challenges they face.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, let's think about what all this means for us. We've talked a lot about Gen Z, but what about everyone else? No matter what generation we belong to, what can we learn from how Gen Z approaches activism?
That's a really good question. And I think there are a few key things we can take away. One of the biggest is that authenticity matters. Like we talked about earlier, Gen Z can spot a fake from a mile away, and they don't have any time for empty promises. So if we want to be good allies and advocates, we need to be real in how we support the causes we care about. It's not about following a trend or doing something just to look good on social media. It's about making sure our actions match our beliefs and showing up in a way that really makes a difference.
Yeah, totally. It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And,
Right.
it's not just about being real in what we do. It's also about expecting that same realness from the organizations and leaders we support. Gen Z is holding those in power accountable, and we should too.
For sure. They're calling out hypocrisy
Yeah.
and demanding transparency. That's definitely something we can all learn from.
Another thing we can learn from Gen Z is the power of teamwork and intersectionality. They understand that we're stronger when we work together and that we need to work across our differences to make real change. They're not scared to build connections and work with people, even if they don't agree on every single thing.
It's so inspiring how willing they are to see things from different perspectives and find things we can all agree on. It reminds us that all our struggles are connected and that we can do more when we team up. I think that's a message that everyone can relate to.
Yeah, for sure. And while we can learn so much from Gen Z's energy and creativity, it's also important to remember the tough stuff they're dealing with, like burnout and all the misinformation out there. We can support them by making sure their voices are heard, sharing accurate information, and creating safe spaces for them.
That's really important. We need to remember that they're still young and they're taking on a lot. We can all help create a better world for young activists.
Right. And remember, it's not about trying to be exactly like them or copy everything they do. It's about finding our own ways to help and make a difference. We all have unique talents and experiences that we can use to make things better.
Totally. The important thing is to find our own place in the movement and use our words and actions to make the world a fairer and more just place. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this. Gen Z is showing us that activism can be joyful and creative and even fun. It's not just about protesting or signing petitions. It's about finding ways to express ourselves, connect with others, and make the world a better place.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So go out there and find your own way to make a difference. Find something you're passionate about and get involved. Support organizations that are doing great work. Speak up against things that are wrong. And never underestimate the power you have to create positive change.
That's all for our deep dive into Gen Z and the future of activism. We hope you learned something new today and feel inspired to go out and make a difference. Until next time, stay curious, stay involved, and keep making waves.